They said no one crosses the river after dark, not because of wild animals, but because something ancient listens from beneath the water. The elders warned that the spirit does not chase, it waits, and when a human breaks the law of the night, the spirit takes what it is owed, not flesh, but humanity itself. They said anyone who crossed after sunset would return breathing, but no longer human. One man heard the warning. He understood the price, and he crossed anyway, a place where the whispers of the ancestors linger in the wind, and the shadows of forgotten forests still speak. Here, every story carries the weight of old warnings. Tales once shared beside firelight, when the drums beat slow and the night seemed endless. These are stories that trembled on the lips of elders, passed from generation to generation, meant to guide, to warn, to teach, and sometimes to terrify. Stories the land remembers long after people have left, echoes of voices that refuse to fade, secrets hidden in rivers, forests, and mountains, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to listen. Long before iron roads and distant cities, there was a village cradled between rolling hills and dense, sacred forest. The people lived in harmony with the land, knowing that every tree, every river, every stone carried a spirit, and that the spirits watched always. Daily life was guided by the rules of the unseen. Rituals at sunrise, offerings at the river, songs for the ancestors. No one dared take more than what was needed from the earth, and no one spoke carelessly of the spirits that lingered in shadows. Even the children learned early to respect the unseen, to fear the forests that whispered at night, and to never wander alone when the moon was high, because the spirits were patient, and their anger, when provoked, was swift. Yet despite the order, despite the care, there was one place that none would enter, a grove so ancient, so dark, that even the elders crossed themselves in fear when speaking its name. And there was one rule that no one ever questioned, a rule older than the village itself, a law that, if broken, could claim more than life, something that no one dared test. Seko was no ordinary villager. He was a hunter, respected for his skill with the bow, for the way he could track the swiftest antelope, and return with enough to feed the village for days. The elders admired his courage. The villagers whispered his name with pride, and even children tried to follow in his footsteps, believing him fearless. But courage can blind a man to danger, and Seko carried a flaw few could see, a restlessness that could not be tamed, and a curiosity that pushed him where others would never dare. He questioned the old stories, laughed at the warnings, and sometimes even ignored the advice of the elders. It was this same daring spirit that drew him to the edge of the forest, to the places where the trees seemed to watch, and the wind whispered secrets meant for no human ear. And though he did not yet know it, his defiance, his curiosity, would soon awaken forces older than the village itself. On the night the moon bled red across the sky, Seko felt a pull he could not resist. The elders had warned him countless times. Never cross the river when darkness falls. Never step into the grove where the sacred trees grew thick, for the spirits claimed what was theirs, and they were patient, but not forgiving. But Seko did not hear their words as warnings. He saw them as tales to entertain children, old stories that had no power over him. Even as the wind shifted strangely, and the leaves rustled with whispers he could not understand, he ignored the signs. The river, normally calm, churned with a restless energy. The shadows of the trees stretched unnaturally long, as if to block his path, but he pressed forward anyway. Step by step, he crossed the boundary, leaving the safety of the village behind. And when he entered the grove, he disturbed what had long been left untouched, a place consecrated by the ancestors, where spirits roamed freely and mortals were never meant to tread. A faint voice, older than the village itself, seemed to murmur through the trees, "You are not welcome here." But Seko, driven by curiosity, stepped further still, ignoring the warning, ignoring the presence that watched him silently, until the grove itself seemed to close in around him. The moment Seko stepped deeper into the grove, the air grew thick and heavy, as if the night itself was pressing down on him. The wind no longer whispered softly. It howled through the trees, carrying with it voices he could not place, half murmurs, half laughter, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The river nearby, once calm and silver, now shimmered with an unnatural glow, rippling as if something moved beneath its surface. Watching, waiting, patient, and then he saw it, or rather felt it, a presence older than the village, older than the stones beneath his feet. It did not appear all at once. First, a shadow flickering at the corner of his vision, then a faint whisper curling into his mind. A voice that knew his name before he could speak it. "You have come," it said, "just as we have always known you would." Seko tried to turn, to run, but the forest seemed alive, the trees bending toward him, the ground shifting beneath his feet, closing every path back to safety. And then the chilling truth struck him. The spirit had been watching all along. Every step he thought was private, every breath he thought was his own, had been seen, recorded, and waited upon. Escape was no longer a choice. He was already within its grasp. And the grove was no longer just trees and shadows. It was a trap, a realm of the unseen, and Seko had crossed its threshold. By morning, the grove fell silent once more, but the curse Seko had awakened did not rest. It spread beyond him, invisible yet undeniable, seeping into the village like a shadow crawling over the land. The river, once a source of life, grew dark and foul, its waters twisting unnaturally, refusing to nourish the crops along its banks. The wind no longer carried gentle whispers, but shrieks that rattled the rooftops of huts, and the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches reaching like fingers toward those below. Children awoke, screaming from dreams they could not name, and livestock grew restless, as if sensing an unseen hand tightening its grip on the village. Even the elders, wise in the ways of spirits, felt the walls of their village close in. Time was slipping through their fingers, and with each passing hour, the curse tightened its hold. Seko, once fearless, now understood the weight of what he had done. The consequences were no longer his alone. Every innocent life, every breath of the village, was now entwined with the spirit's wrath. An escape from its reach seemed more impossible with every moment. The forest beyond the village trembled with life and fury, and the people knew this was no ordinary misfortune. This was punishment, ancient and relentless, and it would not be lifted until the spirit had claimed what it was owed. As night fell once more, the air in the grove thickened, and the spirit that had watched Seko since his first step into the forbidden space finally revealed itself. It was not a being of flesh, but of shadows and whispers. Its presence older than the oldest trees, older than the village itself. "You have taken what is not yours," the voice murmured, deep and resonant, echoing through Seko's mind. "You have crossed boundaries set by those who came before you, and now the balance must be restored. The punishment was not simple death. It was a stripping away of what made him human. His identity, his place in the village, even his very sense of self, would be reshaped if he did not offer what the spirit demanded. "You may leave this place alive," the voice continued, "but only if you surrender what is owed. If you refuse, the darkness you have awakened will consume more than just you. It will consume them all." Seko felt the weight of the choice crushing him. To give up something deeply part of himself, to confess what he had done, to bear a truth so raw and personal that it would change him forever, or to let the village, the innocent, and the land suffer for his own pride. It was a choice no mortal should ever face, a choice that demanded sacrifice and promised permanent change. The grove waited in silence, watching him, judging him, and Seko understood, for the first time, that some mistakes could never be undone, and some lessons could only be learned through loss. Seko stood in the heart of the grove, the shadows of ancient trees stretching like long, waiting fingers. The spirit loomed over him, a presence felt more than seen, its gaze heavy, patient, unyielding. He knew what he must do. With trembling hands, he offered the part of himself demanded. Not gold, not food, but a piece of his very identity, the essence of his pride and defiance. As he spoke the confession aloud, the wind stilled and the whispers faded into silence. The river, dark and churning, slowly settled, its waters reflecting the first faint light of dawn. The forest, which had seemed alive with fury, grew calm, almost reverent. The curse that had spread through the village began to lift, as though the land itself was exhaling after holding its breath for days. Seko felt the weight of what he had lost, but he also felt the truth. Some sacrifices are meant to restore balance, to right the wrongs that mortals cannot always see. And in that grove, where shadows and spirits had ruled, the lesson was clear. Ancient laws are not meant to be broken lightly, and the cost of defiance is never small. The spirit receded, its purpose fulfilled, leaving the grove quiet, the village safe, and Seko forever changed. From that day forward, the story of Seko became more than a tale. It became a warning, passed from elder to child, carried in whispered voices around the fires, and spoken only when the night was deep and the wind stirred the trees. The villagers never again crossed the river after dark. They left the grove untouched, for they knew that some places belong only to the spirits, and that breaking their rules could bring calamity beyond imagination. Even generations later, the story is still told, a reminder that curiosity without respect can awaken forces older than humanity itself. The fear of what lies unseen in the forests, the rivers, and the shadows is not mere superstition. It is memory, warning, and truth intertwined. And so, the lesson endures, the boundaries set by those who came before us, the laws carved into the land by ancestors, are not to be ignored, for the spirits are always watching, and some debts can never be repaid. If these stories are to survive, they must be carried forward, from one generation to the next, just as the elders once did, beside the fire, as shadows danced across the walls of their huts. The voices of our ancestors, their lessons, their warnings, their truths, cannot be allowed to fade into silence. They must be remembered and honored in every tale we share. And so, if you would see these stories live on, if you would hear the whispers of the forests, the rivers, and the winds, then journey with us. Join the Africa Folktale Vault, and let the voices of the past guide us still.